And also it was in that conversation where he told me that he knew about the death of my girlfriend. The first time I'd heard that from Ted. So that obviously upset me greatly. I first met Ted in the lobby of the public defender's office. Ted came in the back door from the alley. He was trying to be joking. He didn't appear to be scared. And I asked him what happened in Utah, and he told me, I'm not guilty, I'm being framed. And as a defense lawyer, I know that innocent people are investigated. I know innocent people are charged. And I knew the evidence against Ted Bundy was very circumstantial. So you're going, well, this guy may be innocent. Ted certainly had a grand idea of himself and a minimization of the charges against him. He used to call it the stupid little matter. And I would go, Ted, there's 10 cops outside waiting to follow you. You know, it's not a stupid little matter. As with many criminals and sociopaths, they have no judgment at all. Ted would try to minimize things that simply couldn't be minimized. So he was jovial and trying to be charismatic. He wasn't charismatic, he was trying to be charismatic. Ted really, to me, never pulled it off. I became officially his attorney in Washington State, and I also began working with him on the charges in Utah.
Ted Bundy returned to Seattle this week under the watchful eye of local investigators who say he is a person of interest in a grisly string of abductions and murders dating back to 1971. Bundy is currently free on bail from a kidnapping charge in Utah.
When I first met Ted, my strategy was to minimize the public's belief that he was the Ted. Ted knew he was being followed. There was no subtlety to what the task force was doing when Ted was in Seattle.
I think that defense attorneys are necessary evils, for sure. I don't harbor any ill will for them at all, other than I'm trying to beat them all the time.
Keppel called me. He said, I'll never forget, John, this is Detective Keppel, and in this case, the attorney-client privilege shouldn't apply. I'm kind of very more anti-authoritarian then than ever, but it really pissed me off that he would think I would do that. I said very firmly, you're full.
I've known John Henry Browne for years. Well, let's put it this way, I would put up with John Henry Browne. Like him? No. I would think that that would be not a proper use of the word like at all.
The day before I was to testify at Ted's Miami trial, I went to visit him at the Dade County Jail. And he was lying on the cell floor and he was crying and he was very upset. And that's when he looked at me from the floor with tears in his eyes and said, John, I really want to be a good person, I'm just not. And that's when he told me, and I think the only person he told was that the first person he killed was a young boy when they were playing some kind of sex game in the woods. And so he must have been only 12, 13, or 14. I didn't go into a lot of detail because I didn't need to or want to. Ted told me in that interview that he killed over 100 people. And then he told me he'd been active in the Northeast, Idaho, and for the first time, California. I think he was purging himself, and I think for a brief period of time, that small part of him that recognized that he was evil came out. That was the time when I felt most like I don't want to be here. I'm not sure I even want to be a defense lawyer. I remember holding the jail cell, not facing Ted, and I was going, you know, what the hell are you doing here? You know, why are you helping this disgusting person?
When Ted began confessing a lot of things, and John couldn't talk about what Ted confessed until Ted died because of the attorney-client privilege, which was it wasn't 36 dead girls, it was over 100, and the details of what he did to their bodies and did to them when they were alive. What a horrible burden, you know, to deal with someone like that. That's the worst of the worst, the most heinous of the heinous. And all of those details, John had to keep to himself. And I think that had to be torture.
And also it was in that conversation where he told me that he knew about the death of my girlfriend. The first time I'd heard that from Ted. So that obviously upset me greatly. There's no belief amongst the police authorities now that Ted had anything to do with Deborah's murder. But she did fit the profile of all the people that he was killing. I went to visit him in the Utah prison. He had just been charged with murder in Colorado, and I was assisting him on the extradition. There was a lot of eyewitness identification in Colorado, and the circumstantial evidence was mounting. I was talking about getting a psychological exam for him to convince the authorities in Utah and Colorado to release him to Washington, where he could serve his time in a mental institution rather than prison. I suggested that idea, and he ultimately rejected it. Usually, Ted would continue to play the game. I'm not guilty, I'm not guilty, I'm being framed, I'm being framed, I'm being framed. But in Utah, he no longer had that facade. He didn't say and admit they had committed all these horrendous acts, but he no longer pretended that he didn't. And now everything was becoming more and more clear to me that Ted was the sociopathic murderer that people claimed he was. And that upset me greatly. I mean, I had to compartmentalize my lawyer side and my human side, not only my human side, but somebody who'd been victimized because of the death of my girlfriend. So there was this turmoil going on inside me. And the first time I really recognized that was in Utah. And it was very difficult for me. I believe everybody has the presumption of innocence and requires the state to prove things beyond a reasonable doubt. But representing Ted was becoming an ultimate test of my belief system. I really think the only reason to be a lawyer is to help people. I don't think it's to make money, because I haven't made a lot of money, but I think I've helped a lot of people. I represented a National Football League player who was charged with sex offenses, and he was totally innocent, and I won that case. I've taken to trial over 350 cases, which is probably more than any lawyer I know. It's really hard work. You know, I've had a family life that hasn't been very normal.
John's very complicated. He's brilliant, very thoughtful. He's very funny, but in a lot of ways, I think he's been tortured, having handled some of these really horrific cases over many decades.
There are times when I dealt with my stress in unproductive ways, drugs, alcohol. I think I dealt with it not very well. My dad, who was at one point, a very progressive man, said, if we're gonna have a free society, there has to be defense lawyers who are the absolute best and who will stand between the citizen and the government. Then he paused and he says, I'm just sorry that it's you.